Hello and welcome. It's time for another bonus. In fact, it's past time for another bonus. You'll have to excuse me, I've been sleeping all day. For the gameplay this week, I have some Goat Simulator. I'm sure most of you have seen this game by now. I'm sure it's been very popular on YouTube. I was talking about this game last week and I said it looked alright, but I didn't want to pay for it, and someone very kindly offered me a key for it. So I accepted and I gave it a bit of a go. And I thought to myself, yeah, this is alright, but I'm glad I didn't pay for it. So, on with the questions. Let's see what we've got. Is this better, YouTube? Says, hello Mr. Brown. I'm interested to hear your view on the Oscar Pistorius trial going on as I type this comment. I tend to dislike public trials. I find them a little bit farcical, a little bit gawkerish. Part of me kind of wishes that the media would give it a rest, that there would be some privacy for the judicial process. In an ideal world, anybody who was accused of a crime would be given the right of anonymity. But, when it's a celebrity or someone of some reputation, then it's difficult to keep it under wraps. But when it comes to certain crimes, it's difficult to come back from that as far as your reputation's concerned. If you're ever accused of, a lewd act or, a serious crime, rape or murder, then it's a permanent shadow that's always going to hang over you. And if you're found innocent, it doesn't matter. So in an ideal world, it'd be nice if we didn't hear anything about trials until a judgment was made. But, of course, that's not the world that we live in. So I don't know whether Oscar Pistorius actually is guilty of murder. I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate. I wish more people would defer to the judicial system. It's not perfect, but it's the best thing that we've got as far as justice is concerned. Slightly more light-hearted, Yami Sankey says, hey Stu, what do you think about Reese's chocolate cups? Good or bad? I am actually quite a big fan of Reese's chocolate cups. They are quite nice. I like the fusion of peanut butter and chocolate. It's a good mix. They actually sell them here in the UK as well, which is nice. Although we don't get Reese's Pieces, which is a shame because I like those as well. You can buy them, but you've got to import them, and it's generally not worth the money. K4MRU7 says, what do you think Titanfall hasn't got going on YouTube? People were so hyped for it, and it seemed like it fizzled out quite quickly. When it released, it was huge on YouTube and Twitch, but after a few days it dropped off massively. It barely gets 2,000 viewers on Twitch these days. I suppose it's a question of critical mass. Some games are so large that their presence is almost self-perpetuating. Games like Call of Duty, League of Legends, Dota 2, I suppose, as well. They're all hugely popular. A lot of people play them, and because a lot of people play them, a lot of people make videos about them, and because a lot of people make videos about them, a lot of people play them. So you've got this feedback loop where everything's kind of self-sustaining. Titanfall, unfortunately, doesn't have the benefit of being a part of a long-established franchise. It was on a limited set of consoles and PC as well. So you've got a number of opposing factors that limit this sort of self-sustaining growth. It's not a bad game by any means, but there are plenty of half-decent games out there which don't really receive any attention on YouTube. And I suppose this is why Call of Duty has been incredibly difficult to dethrone. To gain a huge amount of momentum from one game release is practically impossible. There's still hope left for Titanfall, but it really comes down to Titanfall 2. It needs to be fully cross-platform, the next gen needs to be fully established when it comes out, and they need to knock it out of the park. If they don't do all those things, then, the series might be condemned to perpetual mediocrity. So yeah, certainly as a video maker, it's interesting to see these demand curves and how things tail off. As far as my own videos are concerned, I'm content enough to do a short series for Titanfall. The way I see it, there are 10 pilot weapons, so I've got an out after 10 episodes. There are an additional 6 Titan weapons. I could do those, but it comes down to how well the series does. I'm going to give it a few more episodes before I plan an exact strategy, but I'm certainly not planning on spending all year with the game. I'm going to move on to something else relatively soon, and that something else is probably going to be an Iconic Arms series, in the vein of the Desert Eagle video which I did. Now that video, that did spectacularly well. In fact, I think it was at about 200,000 views, which is, it's certainly above average for me at the moment. So I know full well there's some decent growth there, but that sort of series, it's kind of timeless. It doesn't matter when I do it. So I'm going to spend some time with Titanfall. I enjoy the game. I want to reach Gen 10. And I have a feeling the views aren't going to be spectacular, but if Titanfall 2 turns out to be really good, and I'm doing videos for that, I think it will be quite nice from a heritage perspective to have a Titanfall series there, so people can look back. It could turn out that Titanfall's forgotten and it's left to history. Doesn't matter, had fun. Oh, for those lamenting the fact that I'm doing a game series at the minute, don't worry too much, I am planning some other content in parallel. I'm actually in the research and writing stage for another episode of Brief History. It's going to be the episode on piracy, or games about pirates, basically. Going forward, I can see myself doing short series, maybe 6 to 10 episodes, and then doing a brief history episode in between, with maybe the occasional special as well. I like doing the brief history stuff. It's fairly reliable for views, gets around 100k, which isn't bad. It's not great considering the amount of work that goes into each episode, but it's good keystone content for sort of broadening my channel and, making the transition to game history, because that's something I'd like to have in the mix for Xbox Ahoy, so it's something I'm trying to move towards. Sometimes it does feel as though a lot of my subscribers are more interested in guns than games though, but I guess that's my own fault really. The BRE says, Stu, what game coming out in 2014 to 2015 are you anticipating most? There are a few games I'm looking forward to. Not many, but a few. Destiny, that's kind of, I suppose, a relatively big one that's coming up. It's not often that you get a new IP from Bungie. It's a once-in-a-decade sort of thing. And I'm not 100% sure if I'll actually like it, but I'm willing to give Destiny a chance. I think it's the only game I have pre-ordered at the minute. Otherwise, I always have a soft spot for anything involving driving. I like driving games. I don't know why. I actually had Drive Club pre-ordered because it was supposed to be a launch title with my PS4. But, well, since it got delayed, I have since cancelled it because I've become alarmed at its potential. But Drive Club is still on my radar and I'd like it to be good because I the idea of a social racer, I guess, yeah, sounds alright. I'm also quite looking forward to The Crew. I love games in which you can explore. And The Crew seems to have that. It's got the entirety of the United States as its map. It's simplified, I think there's only about 10 to 20 cities or something, but, you can still drive a long way. I think it takes a couple of hours to drive coast to coast. I believe the game has some heritage in the Test Drive Unlimited series, which, it wasn't the best series in the world, but I kind of liked it because I have a soft spot for driving games. Beyond that, what else is there? There's a couple of horror games. I don't normally like horror games, but there's a couple that are coming out which actually look reasonably interesting. Alien Isolation is basically sci-fi horror, and you're trapped on a spaceship with a single alien, from the Aliens films. And you've got to avoid it, and it looks very pretty. The lighting's quite nice. Similar on the PC is a game called Routine. Again, it's kind of a sci-fi survival horror, and it's set on an abandoned moon base, which it looks cool. I love the graphic design for it. Other than that, there's a whole bunch of maybes. I have morbid curiosity for the next Call of Duty from, I think it's Sledgehammer. I don't know what they're going to do, but it might be interesting. It might be awful. There's Watch Dogs as well, which could be okay. It looks just like a futuristic Assassin's Creed though, so I'm not hugely excited for it. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff that I've completely forgotten about. But, I don't know, 2014, things are really just warming up for this generation, so there's not a huge amount of good stuff coming out. Hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have a few decent releases, things will start to pick up. Bleary Line 7 says, what version of the GTX 760 did you go for? I think it's the MSI. Now, I don't really like MSI as a brand, I don't have a huge amount of respect for them, but it was the cheapest. I think my last one was an XFX or something, and given that one had broken, I was really just looking for a cheap replacement, so, not a top tier brand, but it'll do. Koza says, hey Stu, what's your opinion on bullshots? Fake edited screenshots and or trailers. Seems like Ubisoft are pioneers in that regard, since every picture and trailer, especially for Watch Dogs, posted by them, turns out to be photoshopped, and the release game looks much, much worse. But it also happened with your Forza 5, for example. Do you think misleading commercials are wrong, or that in marketing everything is permitted? Well, I don't know if I'd call Ubisoft pioneers, because video game advertising does have a long history of dressing things up a little bit. I mean, it used to be the case that video games were advertised with lavish paintings of scenes that you could imagine while playing the game. And it's only really in recent years where video game footage has become good enough to show as an advertisement, where the adjustment of said gameplay footage or the enhancement of it could be deemed dishonest. And let's be clear, I mean, if you are presenting something as gameplay, and the final gameplay doesn't reflect it, then I suppose it is dishonest. Sometimes, when you're dealing with pre-release footage, it's not entirely malicious, though. Quite often the dev kits for games are a little bit more powerful than the release kits, or quite often they'll have more RAM. Like for instance, when I was working with Modern Warfare 3 doing the Elite videos, I was running pre-release footage, and I was playing on Xbox 360 dev kits which had a gigabyte of RAM instead of just 512. Now, this gives developers a little bit of overhead to add on debug tools and stuff like that, so it has a purpose, but as far as streaming textures and stuff like that, the game will run a little bit better as a result. So I would say the Forza 5 stuff, my Forza 5 apparently, although I wasn't a developer, possibly wasn't the most malicious example of bullshottery. I'd wager if they released the game for PC, it probably would look similar to the footage they released. I'm guessing at some point they had to scale it down for release Xbox One hardware. I suppose in retrospect you could construe malicious intent, but in a pre-release environment you don't always know how well you're going to be able to optimize the game, what features you're going to be able to include, and so sometimes you have to make a best guess. And obviously developers don't necessarily want to make their game look worse than release, so they're always going to tend on the favourable side. So it's a tough call to make sometimes, especially, really early pre-release stuff, because sometimes you don't even know what the final hardware is going to be. I suppose they could put a little disclaimer on the advert saying, not final gameplay footage. I'm not sure if that would indemnify the developer, but I suppose that's what they do when they advertise mobile phones. On the bomb, little line of text, sequences shortened. I just guess, as a consumer, you need to be aware that, advertisements are going to lie to you. In the grand scheme of things, if you think about stuff like perfume adverts, car adverts, even antiperspirant adverts selling you a lifestyle, aspiration, slightly enhanced gameplay footage seems, almost less dishonest than some of the adverts out there. Does that defend it? Probably not. Multiple Explode says, are you a gingerist, ginger plus racist, just because you're from the UK? No, I can't say that I am. Ginger people I have no issues with. Rangers are alright by me. Is that a gingerist term? I'm not. No, it's fine. One of my friends is ginger. Silver Lukey says, Dear Stuart, when the Queen dies, are you happy with Prince Charles being king? Would you prefer it if we skipped straight to William? I realise this couldn't happen. Or are you anti-monarchy altogether? At this point, I don't really care. I'm content to let the monarchy do its own thing. I'm in no rush to abolish the monarchy. I have no desire for anyone's heads to be separated from their body or anything like that. I think a long, slow, diminishing degree of importance is probably the way to go. And we don't want to destroy the commemorative plate industry, so there's that. T-Bird says, Hey Stu, would you be interested in making videos on certain game genres such as horror or RTS? I'd love it if you did a video on horror games. It's a possibility. I suppose the brief history format would be pretty good for that. I've considered doing brief history of genre. I was thinking about doing one for driving games because I own quite a lot of driving games. But certainly something like horror or RTS isn't out of the question. Tuga Avenger says, I'm sorry Stu, but as gifted as you are, JB Blank, or Blisk, will give you a run for your money. Blisk was definitely my favourite voice work in Titanfall. I quite like the South African accent. I like the way they say certain words. I think one of my favourites is prototype. I love that. It's brilliant. Agent Tuck says, Hey Stu, have you ever been to New Zealand before? Or had any New Zealand beer? If so, favourite place and or beer? I haven't been, but I would quite like to go. The weather looks nice. Rainy, but kind of, nice temperature. As far as beer is concerned, I think I've had 2 from New Zealand. I've had a bottle of Tui, which was okay. Not spectacular, but okay. And I've also had another one from 8 Wired, which are a pretty good brewer, actually, called the Big Smoke. That was a smoked porter, a Rauch beer. Smoked beers are kind of weird, like smoky bacon, but without the bacon. Also, you drink it. Joe Grave says, a friend of mine says never go AMD for a computer build because of the energy bill. Have you ever built a computer for the dark side, Stu? I've had a few AMDs in my time. I'm trying to think, what was my first one? It was an AMD, was it a K7-233 or a K6-233? I can barely remember. It was in 1998. Quick look on Wikipedia tells me it must have been a K6. After that, I think I had an Athlon 2000 at some point. And then after that, I had an Athlon 3200. I think I replaced the 3200 in 2006, 2007. I got an Intel, my very first Intel PC. I got an Extreme Edition one, which was hideously expensive, but it was pretty powerful for its time. It was even able to play Crysis. Since then, I've kind of been with Intel, but I guess, at some point in the future I might switch back to AMD. I've enjoyed my time with my Intel processors, but I'm not particularly brand loyal. I'm more about price over performance, really. Kazwizas Plamenko says, what do you think about OTEC and their music? Some people wouldn't even call it music. Is it OTEC? OTECA? I don't know. I like OTEC, but I don't like their music. I've tried to get into it, I don't know. Just not my cup of tea. And I like a lot of stuff from that area. I mean, I like Aphex Twin, I like Boards of Canada, and their album Dear Daddy. I've got the Triple Gatefold and LP. It's beautiful. But OTEC and what's the other one? Plat, or is it Played? I don't know. I don't know. I can't get into their music. They don't have enough of a jam for my brain to cotton onto. I'd still see them in concert, though, given an opportunity. Stu Backen says, Stu, are you a curry man or a teriyaki man? Well, I like both, but teriyaki's a little bit more difficult to come across here in the UK. This is more curry territory. So of the two, I eat a much, much larger amount of curry. Teriyaki is something I only have very rarely. The Carrador says, what are your top 5-ish favourite games? In no particular order. Oh, the big ones, the all-times. I would probably say Civilization is my favourite game series of all time. I started with the first one, and these days I'd probably play 5, but I played all of them, and I like all of them. Also an honourable mention to Alpha Centauri, love that. Colonization as well. Other favourites, I also like the XCOM series. UFO Enemy Unknown was my first, really liked that. Never really played Terror from the Deep, because it wasn't on the Amiga. I have played it since, but I don't have the same love as I do for the original. I also played Apocalypse on the PC, loved Apocalypse. Apocalypse... Oh, I don't know if I prefer it to the original, but I did like it a lot. And then, of course, recently the reboot. I really like that. It's not quite the same as the original, but it's good in a new sort of way, which I think is what a reboot needs to be. Other games, going back in the past a little bit. One called A-Train for the Amiga, which is a Japanese train management game. Loved it. In a similar vein, I loved Populous 2 as well. Oh, and Chris Sawyer's Locomotion from 2004, fantastic train sim. It was basically Roller Coaster Tycoon 2 with all of that boring roller coaster nonsense taken out of it and replaced with fascinating public transit simulation. And it was brilliant. I loved it. You could set up bus routes, you could set up trams, trains, airplanes. Oh, fantastic. I like games like that. They don't make them like they used to. Is that 5? I think it's 5. I'm going to go on though. Secret Monkey Island series, big fan of that. I kind of realised that most of the games I've mentioned are actually strategy games. I guess I like the strategy genre. It's just, I don't know, here I am playing all these FPS games like some sort of fraud. I do like FPS games as well. I've been playing them since Doom. Well, before then, really, Wolfenstein. But FPS it's kind of a cheap thrill, really. You know, shooting people across the internet is always nice, but it's not as comfy as a nice old strategy game. Chassa12345 says, did you enjoy the old BBC series Robot Wars? Seems like your kind of show. I did rather like that, yeah. It was kind of lame in some respects, but it was still pretty cool. You watched it and you kind of wished that they could actually have decent weapons, you know, like actual projectile weapons. And instead of all these stupid wedge-shaped robots which just run into each other. And then you remember that it's actually the best robot combat. It's the only robot combat show on TV, so you just settle down and you enjoy it for what it is. I think the American series, what was it called, BattleBots? I think they had better combat, but they didn't have the charm. Gretchen Monsher says, what is your opinion on games such as Gone Home and Dear Esther that can be argued that are not games at all? If you don't define them as games, what criteria does a piece of software have to reach until it becomes a game? I think this debate is very similar to the are video games art discussion. Ultimately, it boils down on, well, how you define things. You can use the word art in its loosest sense to describe any human endeavour. So you could say if a farmer ploughs his field, it's art. And the same goes with games. I mean, you can describe a game as any form of interactive software that provides entertainment. But then, you know, if somebody makes a picture in Excel, does that mean Excel is a game? In fact, with macros, you can actually make some pretty advanced stuff within Excel. I've seen Conway's Game of Life implemented. With a bit of imagination, you could probably run an RPG in there. But of course, the thing is, Excel isn't a game. You know it's not a game, I know it's not a game. But it has many of the traits that you could associate with a game. I mean, think of Minecraft, for instance. Minecraft is nothing more than three-dimensional Excel when it comes down to it. But for some reason we think, well, okay, Minecraft is a game, and Excel isn't. And everything just kind of reduces down into really unproductive discussion. It doesn't matter whether Excel is a game or not. If you want to think of it as a game, then fine, go ahead. Most people won't agree with you. I think in the case of something like Gone Home, which, I mean, it is a piece of software designed to be entertaining. And under that definition, it is a game, but it also has a lot in common with stuff like visual novels, and some people might argue that visual novels aren't games. And that's a fair point, but it's more than a visual novel. You can move around, you can explore, there are other elements to it, so it kind of transcends that status. It's a little bit nebulous, and it really does depend on how stringent your definition of a game is. There's a concept known as synecdoche, where a smaller part of something can refer to a larger part of something, or a larger part of something can refer to a smaller part of something. For instance, you might call your car wheels, my wheels. Your car is not just wheels, there are other parts to it, but by referring to a smaller part, you can refer to a greater whole. So maybe we could use the word game in a synecdochial sense to refer to not only games, but visual novels and other forms of software that exist purely for entertainment. Anyway, it's a pointless argument that accomplishes nothing. The same goes for our video games art. I was considering making a video on this and trying to persuade people that Excel is a video game because it meets all of the criteria. I may yet do a special on this in the future. It's part of the reason I was playing Nobby Boy, because it's one of those games that kind of lies on the boundaries of what can be considered a game. But it's a topic that has been covered before, and well, just imagine the comments in the comment section. The arguments, the pointless arguments, the endless arguments. It's YouTube all over. Anyway, we've hit time, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I shall see you on Friday for another Titanfall weapon guide, but after that, next week, I'm away. I'm off, I'm getting married, I'm going for a honeymoon, I'll be off for a week. So, no bonus next week, awfully sorry about that. But the next time you hear from me, I will be married. Fancy that, eh? Fancy. Unless I get cold feet. Maybe I'll get cold feet. Ooh. Anyway, until next time, farewell.